By the time he died in 1953, the left-wing intelligentsia had been defending Stalin for decades. To give just one example, in 1935, the Soviets passed a decree allowing them to execute 12-year-olds. Yet the French Communist Party simply declared that this was proof of how quickly people matured under socialism. But this faith was to suffer a severe rupture in 1956. That was the year that Khrushchev publicly admitted to and denounced the Stalinist horrors. It became clear that everything the capitalist press had been saying for decades about Soviet tyranny was true, while all the denials of the political left were proven false. Just months later, the Soviet regime revealed it had lost none of its brutal authoritarianism when the tanks rolled into Hungary to crush the democracy protests. It was a shattering blow. Large numbers deserted the movement, but the true faithful still clung on to their beliefs. Some, like Che Guevara, simply claimed that the Hungarian Rising was a counter-revolution, orchestrated and paid for by the American government. The university system continued to be dominated by Marxists, like G.D.H. Cole, the socialist professor of history at Oxford, who in 1942 had argued that it would be much better for Britain and Europe to be ruled by Stalin than by the destructive and monopolistic cliques which dominate Western capitalism. The remainder of the century was dominated by communist academics like Eric Hobsbawm, E.P. Thompson, Christopher Hill, Raphael Samuel, and Raymond Williams. Lee Harvey Oswald remained a staunch Stalinist, and that position convinced him to shoot the anti-communist JFK. Che Guevara was also a long-time admirer of Stalin. In a letter to his Aunt Beatrice on 10th of December 1953, he wrote that, "I have sworn before a picture of the old and mourned comrade Stalin that I won't rest until I see these capitalist octopuses annihilated." He signed off the missive with shining faith in the socialist future, and began appending the name Stalin II to his letters in place of his own signature. Che also liked to say that his friend Ramon Valdez resembled the feared founder of the KGB, Felix Dzerzhinsky. Che tried to goad the Soviets into starting a nuclear war with America, and he made the startling claim that if the island might disappear from the face of the earth because an atomic conflict may be unleashed on its account, Cuba's people would consider themselves satisfied and fulfilled. And these apologists endured for decades after Che's death. Arthur Scargill, head of the National Union of Miners, was also an admirer of Stalin, while John Kenneth Galbraith, a Harvard economist active in the Democratic Party, was still commending the economic development of the Soviet Union in 1985, when it was on the very brink of collapse. Even Stalin's own daughter revealed the nonsense of that position. Svetlana Alilieva remarked that her grandfather, a skilled labourer in St. Petersburg, had lived in a four-room apartment, as much as a Soviet professor or doctor could dream of by the 1980s. When Otis Sik, economic minister in Alexander Dubček's Czechoslovakia, attempted to set him straight on the realities of fiscal Marxism, Galbraith simply dismissed him as uninformed. Rather unbelievably, there are still supporters of more recent vintage as well. Andrew Murray had been a significant British communist for years before joining Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party as their election campaign chief in 2016. He'd gone on record as abhorring the hack propagandists who abominate the name of Stalin beyond all others. Remarkably, Murray had also spoken behalf on the Communist Party of Britain to state that our party has already made its basic position of solidarity with the People's Republic of Korea quite clear. In the year 2000, the so-called New Communist Party of Britain established a website which published a remarkable essay by one Andy Brooks. It presented a view of the 20th century through the most distorted lens imaginable. He eulogized the likes of Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Kim Il-sung, Ho Chi Minh, and Fidel Castro, while lamenting how they had been subjected to denigration and abuse by the hired hands of the bourgeois media, Trotskyites, and revisionists. The reason for the hatred levelled at Stalin was apparently because the Soviet Union was the hope of working people across the world. Brooks continued to claim that the colossal achievements of the Soviet Union, led by Stalin, was living proof of the validity of the socialist system. While the economies of the imperialist world crashed and burned, the people of the Soviet Union saw their living standards rise 12-fold. While the imperialists prepared for another world war against themselves and eventually against the USSR, the Soviet Union worked tirelessly for collective security and peace. Brooks wholesale accepted the Stalinist version of the show trials and dismissed any suggestion of atrocities committed under the regime. In an article in The Guardian on the 16th of February 2006, Seamus Milne also made some extraordinary claims. He lamented the rewriting of history, which had resulted in negative portrayals of Stalin and Mao, and suggested that, for all its brutalities and failures, communism in the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, and elsewhere delivered rapid industrialization, mass education, job security, and huge advances in social and gender equality. It encompassed genuine idealism and commitment. Milne subsequently suspended his journalistic career and rose to become the Director of Communications for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. He was also alleged, in true Stalinist fashion, to have doctored the speech of Clive Lewis at the 2016 Labour conference and helped arrange for the demotion of the man many had tipped as challenger to Corbyn's leadership. The wholesale hatred Milne has for the West is palpable in numerous articles he has penned, which repeatedly lament the revisionism which has given Stalin and Mao such bad reputations. He also compares Western civilization's record in colonialism unfavourably with that of the East communist regimes. While it's undeniable that imperialism has been responsible for a swathe of atrocities, with the rule in the Belgian Congo standing out as a particularly vile example, this is still a most contentious point. But as Milne insists on attempting to persuade us of the positive aspects of the Chinese and Soviet systems, then we must examine the benefits of Western civilization too. We have free speech, an autonomous press, liberty to travel, a vibrant culture with minimal censorship and propaganda, a successful economy, and well-stocked shops, regular elections, which offer a choice between a number of political parties, as well as, crucially, the rule of law. The Stalinist and Maoist regimes offered none of these. Solzhenitsyn certainly had an eloquent response to the whining of fools like Milne. If the suffering they had endured was insufficient, is it still not more dreadful that we are now being told, 30 years later, don't talk about it? Western societies are far from perfect, particularly their track record in foreign policy. Yet they are infinitely superior to the socialist state such individuals defend. They are superior in rights, prosperity, infrastructure, services, freedoms, and quality of life, as well as equality. This really shouldn't be a discussion anymore. Life in America, in the 20th century, was an infinitely preferable experience to that endured east of the Iron Curtain. The US did have, it's true, its own distasteful witch hunt against communism, particularly in the 1950s when un-American thought was rigorously policed. It was in many ways as repressive and resistant to free political discourse as the USSR was in those dark days. One thing cannot be denied, however. The body count in America's persecution of the politically incorrect was decidedly lower than that of any communist regime. Paradoxical though it sounds, it was far better to be a communist in McCarthy's America than in Stalin's Russia. Yet the loyalty of the converts still endures. Every year at the May Day parade in London, some 20 to 30,000 still march, proudly lofting their hammer and sickle flags while waving huge portraits of Stalin, Lenin, Marx and others. Their banners echo the same rhetoric that defined much of the 20th century in those failed states. And Labour grandees like Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell can be relied on to attend and address the faithful. We shall leave the last word, though, to perhaps the most notorious of all the Soviet apologists. Still widely read and lauded in left-wing circles, the Marxist historian Eric Hobsbawm wrote, shortly before his death, that capitalism crushed the integrity of artists and intellectuals. Considering the track record of Soviet states, that was a remarkable conclusion. But it pales into insignificance next to the sentiments Hobsbawm aired when interviewed by Michael Ignatieff on The Late Show on 24th of October 1994. He started off with the same old doom-laden Manichaean certainties, which justified his membership of the Communist Party. He argued that you didn't have the option, you see. Either there was going to be a future, or there wasn't going to be a future, and this was the only thing that offered an acceptable future. He seemed oblivious to the fact that the future was just fine without communism. In fact, was significantly improved without communism. But Ignatieff then asked him if it would have made a difference to his commitment to the party if he had known through the 1930s just how many people were being killed as a result of the regime. And he responded, shockingly, probably not. Pressing him further, his interlocutor asked, had the radiant tomorrow actually been created? The loss of 15, 20, 30 million people might have been justified? And Hobsbawm's response was immediate. Yes. If you want to support this channel, please like and subscribe. And if you're interested in these topics, I've written 2 books which go into them in extensive detail. They're called The Tyranny of the Left, and they're available on the links below. Please feel free to pick them up and let me know what you think. Thank you.